A single sheet of goatskin parchment sits in a locked cedar chest inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, Ethiopia. It has not left that building in more than 400 years. Most people who pass through the compound never see it. It is written in GES and it contains a list. Not a story, a list. The names of the things that were taught to humanity by something that was not human, and what each one of them taught. Church leaders voted this book out of Scripture at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. They banned it, they ordered it removed from every approved collection, and called it dangerous. For 17 centuries, in the West, it stayed that way, buried. Then, in 1947, in the caves above the Dead Sea at Qumran, 11 separate copies of it surfaced among the scrolls. 11. More copies than were found of most books that stayed in the Bible. The oldest of them predate the New Testament by a century. And when scholars translated the oldest fragments, they found what the ban was protecting. The Book of Enoch says that human civilization did not develop on its own. It says a specific group of beings crossed a boundary they were forbidden to cross and handed us knowledge we were never meant to have. Metallurgy, weapons, chemistry, the reading of the stars, the making of ink, and the setting down of words. Not a myth, not a metaphor. The text names each teacher. It names each subject. And it records the one secret they were never able to steal, the hidden name that holds creation shut. In the next several minutes, you will see what the text actually says, what the archaeological record found buried in the same era it describes, and why direct access to the Axum manuscripts has been restricted since 1974. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The list is not in one place. It appears in two. The first is in the Book of the Watchers, chapters 6 through 8, the oldest layer of the entire book. The second is buried deep in the Parables, chapter 69, in a section that survives complete only in the Ethiopian manuscripts. Fragment 4Q201, held at the Israel Museum's Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, preserves the Aramaic of chapter 8, carbon dated older than any surviving New Testament text. The Ge'ez manuscript at Axum holds both lists in full, and the two lists do not perfectly match. Things were added, things were dropped. R.H. Charles, whose 1906 Oxford translation is still the version most people quote, noticed the same thing that later troubled Michael Knibb in his 1978 edition. The passage does not read like apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic writing deals in symbols, beasts with horns, cups of wrath, vague, shifting imagery. This reads like something else. It reads like an inventory. First person, past tense, each entry a name followed by a specific technical discipline. The kind of document a clerk files, not the kind a prophet dreams. And this is where it gets disturbing. What we're looking at breaks into three parts: the teachers, the subjects, and the one secret that was withheld. Start with the teachers. Chapter 8 opens plainly. The text says, Azazel taught men to make swords, and knives, and shields, and breastplates. The surface reading is simple mythology, a story about where weapons came from. But read what it actually specifies. It does not stop at swords. It continues. It says he showed them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. Extraction, smelting, alloying. Azazel does not teach a skill. He teaches an industry. Mining, metallurgy, and the forging of finished bronze and iron in a single verse. He had no reason to know how strange that ordering is. The text places this transfer before the flood in deep antiquity, and it credits the entire technology of worked metal to a single source and a single moment. No slow development, no centuries of trial and error. A download. But the text doesn't stop there. What follows is the chemistry. The same verse says Azazel taught the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. The surface reading is cosmetics, eye paint, vanity. But antimony is not vanity. Antimony is a metalloid. Its compounds are used to harden alloys and to make pigment. The Ge'ez word here covers the whole practice of mineral chemistry: grinding stone into powder, fixing color, treating the eyes with a metal-based salve. This is not a verse about makeup. It is a verse about extractive chemistry, described by someone who is listing outputs, not explaining a craft. And then comes the part that shouldn't be possible. Chapter 8 continues down the roster. Baraki Jal taught astrology, Kokabel the constellations, Ezequiel the knowledge of the clouds, Arachiel the signs of the earth, Shamsiel the signs of the sun, Sariel the course of the moon. Read that as a list, and something surfaces that ancient superstition should not contain. That is not a grab bag of magic. That is a curriculum. Meteorology, stellar cataloging, solar observation, lunar cycle tracking, terrestrial surveying, each one assigned to a named teacher, each one a distinct field. The text is not describing sorcery. It is describing a syllabus of the natural sciences, split cleanly by discipline, as if someone cataloged exactly which knowledge came from where. Here's what the translators left out. The standard English editions, Charles in 1906, and most that followed, render the crime of the watchers softly. They taught, they revealed, they made known. Neutral verbs. Instruction. But the older Aramaic and the Ge'ez use a harder frame. The knowledge is called a raza, a secret, and the act is theft. Chapter 16 in the Ge'ez says these were the secrets that had not yet been permitted, brought down before their time. Not shared, not taught, released early. The distinction the Western editions blur is the whole point. The problem was never that humanity gained metallurgy or astronomy. The problem, the text says, was the schedule. This knowledge was coming anyway. It was stolen ahead of when creation was ready to hold it. The text moves on, but the implication sits there. Somebody, according to Enoch, decided humanity was not ready yet, and somebody else overruled that decision. And there is one entry the oldest fragments do not contain at all. In chapter 69, in the parables, in the layer that survives only at Axum, a watcher named Penemu is credited with something the earlier list never mentions. The text says he taught men the bitterness and the sweetness, and instructed them in the art of writing with ink and paper, writing itself, the setting down of words. The text treats this not as a gift, but as a wound. It says, "Through this many have gone astray, because men were not created to confirm their faith with pen and ink." Read that again. A text that exists only because someone wrote it down describes writing itself as forbidden knowledge smuggled to humanity by a being who was punished for it. What modern readers don't realize is how closely the oldest of these claims matches the archaeological record. Take the one that is most testable, metallurgy. Azazel, the text says, opened the earth and taught the working of metals before the flood, in the deepest antiquity the authors could imagine. For a long time, that was treated as pure fantasy. Then, in a cave in the Judean desert above the Dead Sea, at a site called Nahal Mishmar, archaeologists recovered a hoard, more than 400 objects, maces, crowns, scepters, standards, worked in arsenical copper using the lost wax casting method, a technique of real sophistication. The find dates to the Chalcolithic period, the Copperstone Age, roughly 4,500 to 3,500 BCE. It sits in the same landscape the Enoch authors were writing about, and it shows metalworking of startling complexity appearing far earlier and far more suddenly than a slow story of gradual discovery would predict. The text says, advanced metallurgy arrived in this region in deep antiquity as a sudden transfer. The ground in this region produced exactly that, The parallel is not proof, but it is structural. And there is a second detail worth holding next to it. The Nahal Mishmar objects are made of arsenical copper, an alloy of copper and arsenic that is harder than pure copper and casts more cleanly. Nobody knows for certain where the makers learned to control it. There is no long trail of clumsier attempts leading up to it, no workshop layer of failures beneath the finished work. The technique appears already mature. The text says, "The working of metals was not discovered here. It was delivered here complete." The archaeology says, "The earliest sophisticated metalwork in this landscape shows up complete, without the climb that should precede it." The text describes a download. The ground preserved something that looks like one. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. The church removed Enoch from the approved canon and named it among the books forbidden to be read. The stated problem was authorship. The deeper problem was content. This was a text that made the origin of human civilization into a crime scene and named the criminals. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, dismissed Enoch as apocryphal and unreliable. Augustine, writing in the City of God around 410 CE, acknowledged that Enoch wrote real things, but argued the surviving books could not be trusted and should be kept out. Neither man engaged the syllabus. Neither explained why a pre-Roman text cataloged the sciences by discipline. The Ethiopian church, operating outside Rome, never removed it. It kept Enoch as scripture, and it kept the fuller text, the one with Penemu and the stolen art of writing. When the Scottish traveler James Bruce carried 3 Ge'ez manuscripts out of Ethiopia to Europe in 1773, the forbidden knowledge chapters drew immediate unease. 19th century reviewers found the catalogue of sciences difficult to square with the idea of primitive antiquity. Charles, in his own edition, footnoted the syllabus as later embellishment. Embellishment was easier than explanation. There is one more layer most researchers miss. When the Dead Sea Enoch fragments were sorted for publication in the 1950s, the material was ranked by priority. Legal texts and community rules went first. The cosmological and angelic material, the parts naming the teachers and their subjects, went to the bottom of the queue. The definitive edition of the Aramaic Enoch fragments did not appear until 1976. Nearly 3 decades after the scrolls were found, and its commentary treated the forbidden knowledge passages as mythological filler with no historical content. The most specific list in the entire book waited the longest to see print and arrived dismissed. Now, here's where it gets active. Access to the Axum manuscript collection was restricted after 1974, when the revolution that ended the Ethiopian monarchy brought in a government that classified church archives as protected national property. The complete Ge'ez text of the Penemu passage, the writing as forbidden knowledge material, exists in manuscripts inside that collection. Foreign scholars have described applying for direct examination and being turned away. According to the account of one researcher who worked in the field for decades, at least a handful of readings in the Ge'ez tradition are known only through secondary citation, because the primary manuscripts have not been opened to outside study in over half a century. The list of what we were taught and who taught it sits behind stone and a permit no one will grant. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying 200 angels descended onto a mountain and ran a technical college for early humans. The Book of Enoch is not a lab notebook. But what the text describes, when you read it carefully, is not what ancient superstition looks like. It describes the origin of civilization as a single, sudden transfer of specific disciplines, cataloged by name. Metallurgy, mineral chemistry. Astronomy split into solar, lunar, and stellar observation. Meteorology, surveying, writing. And it insists over and over that this knowledge came early, before we were ready, stolen ahead of schedule. He had no framework for the history of science. He should not describe technology arriving as a discrete download rather than a slow climb. And yet, the text sits there in Ge'ez and in Aramaic, in fragments pulled from a cave at Qumran, saying what it has said for over 2,000 years. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If a pre-Roman text catalogs the exact disciplines of civilization by name, if it assigns each one a separate source, if sophisticated metallurgy really does appear, suddenly, in the same landscape, in the deep antiquity the text points to, and if the fullest version of that catalog has been sealed behind restricted archives for 50 years, then the text is not mythology, it is documentation. Enoch, or whoever stood behind the name, wrote down a record of where our knowledge came from with the flat, itemized tone you'd use filing an incident report. Teacher, subject, consequence. The syllabus he describes is either a symbol we have misread for 22 centuries, or it is exactly what he says it is. A record of the moment humanity was handed the secrets it now lives by something that was punished for the handing. The parchment remains in Axum, behind church walls and a government seal. Fragment 4Q201 sits under glass in Jerusalem. The Nahal Mishmar hoard rests in a museum case, 400 objects of impossible early copper. The definitive Aramaic edition sits on a library shelf, its commentary calling the whole thing filler. And in a book the church removed from the Bible 17 centuries ago, a list still runs down the page, name after name, subject after subject, recording what was taught to us and by whom. The manuscript is still sealed, the list is still there, and every discipline it names is still exactly the knowledge we build our world on, exactly the way Enoch said it came. If forbidden history like this pulls at you, the next investigation is already on screen. Keep watching.